BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. And today we're continuing our discussion about Charles Manson, the Manson family, and this episode is really going to talk about how the cult leader formulates his following, or sometimes her following, but of course with respect to Charles Manson. And if you hear anything in the background, there's just a little bit of West Virginia rain going on right outside, so that's all that is, nothing to worry about. And yes, this is a direct response to a series of videos that were put out by Stephanie Harlowe. When I learned that she had done a 6-part series on Charles Manson, I wanted to hear that and learn more about it. And while it is a response, if you haven't heard that series, feel free to keep listening. We're just talking about Charles Manson and some of the things in his life. And you'll see here, of course, this is listed as part 2. In this part, though, they really got into the formation of a cult and how do cults form. And I can see the suggested videos on the side. Stephanie Harlowe seems to have talked about this a lot. I really don't know much about her, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this segment, because I thought it would be just a chance to hear what someone else on YouTube has to say. But yeah, I can see she's talked a lot about cults in some of her other uploads, as we've done so on this channel. We've identified 3 major points. Then those would be in regards to cult leadership. The first is, a cult leader discredits the ways of the past. The second, they produce a new way, usually in the form of a book, but with Charles Manson, it's a little bit different. It's not only in music, and I think that's a big takeaway that I had from part 2 of this segment. Charles Manson didn't only manipulate people with his music, even though he said that that's kind of one of his biggest objectives in life was music. It was more about his personality and so on, and the way that he would talk, and just it's the entire persona of Charlie Manson that would really pull people in. So they discredit the ways of the past, they produce a new way. And the third one is, they tell you that something is missing in your life, and the only way to get it is by following them. I got these things from a video that was done by an individual named Sean McCraney. He hosts a show called Heart of the Matter, and he actually did 6 signs of a cult leader. The reason why I often only talk about 3 of them is, some of them are like, no, the first one he gives is they pull you away from Jesus. That's the first point. And I really wanted to focus in on the points that would be available to everybody, regardless of your religious background or your tradition, or if you're secular, what is available to everybody. And I think that that's a very big pattern that we see with cult leaders. Well, did Charles Manson discredit all the ways of the past? Yes, in many ways he did. He wanted his followers to pretty much look at him as the superior human being, the person who was more in touch with the cosmos than anybody else. And even there were some comparisons of Charles Manson to Jesus that he even talked about. But I believe Stephanie Harlowe was really trying to argue that he had somewhat of a Christian upbringing, and he had an ability to remember large amounts of scripture at once. Very good memory for reciting things from the Bible. But did he really believe that he was some type of incarnation of Jesus? No. Did he have a lot to say about the Bible? Yes. But in this part here, we really get to discuss some things that Charles Manson has going on. And what we think about that is, you ever notice how if you listen to some clips from him on YouTube, he talks in a very peculiar way. And Stephanie Harlowe described it as kind of a sing-song sort of way. His intonation is very different. His voice goes up and goes down at very odd times, or it's very dramatic, and it does kind of captivate you, and it does really pull you in. But what she says is, as we mentioned in part 1, he was a very big student of Dale Carnegie and points of persuasion and argumentative trickery and tactics that would get someone to persuade other people to do what they wanted, to be likable, and he studied this when he was in prison. And the other major influence was L. Ron Hubbard and Scientology. And the third thing that I couldn't remember in the last one was Stranger in a Strange Land. And no, I haven't read that book. I wasn't familiar with it, but that was the third book that was a very big influence on Charles Manson. But another thing that was talked about that could be a major influence on Charles Manson and why he went about life the way he did was the Beatles. And it's the whole concept of being a rock star. When you hear the name cult, the word cult, rather, it's like this person just wants people because they want power and because they want domination. And while that is definitely the undertone, that's definitely kind of a current that is running through this, that's also under the surface. What's on the surface is Charles Manson wanted an entourage. He wanted groupies, because look at all the other rock stars of the time. This is what they were doing. This is how they were acting. This is how they were behaving, and this is how they were getting women to like them. So Charles Manson needed women to like him because he wanted to be a rock star. He wanted to just be the icon of some sorts. But a lot of the things, though, that Charles Manson say, like, I don't know about you guys, when you listen to his stuff, if you just pull up some interview clips, half the things he says sound perfectly reasonable to me. It's like, wow, that's actually kind of an insightful observation. The other half is just like absolute nonsense and silliness. Sometimes it's just noise. Sometimes it's just exaggerated movements. And a point that was proposed by Stephanie Harlowe is that he might have some type of delusional disorder. He might have some serious mental disorder, and that's one of the reasons why he was always able to act so calm and collected. And we mentioned in part one about how the prison guards would try to make Charles Manson angry, and he would just always shrug it off and just say something back to them that was just very calm and collected, and they could never actually get under his skin, and that really bothered them. One point where I would disagree with her is that Charles Manson told somebody once that the way that you get out of a room is not through the door. It's not wanting out. And she's like, that makes no sense no matter which way you spin it. And I'm like, I don't really accept that. Obviously, it's about a state of mind. It's about, that's what he's talking about. It's like, it's how you're thinking. It's your mindset in life. I mean, that's what my response to that was. That could be our first challenge question. How would you respond to that? The way you get out of a room is not through the door. It is not wanting out. I hope I'm quoting that correctly. And if you think, though, that that is just nonsense that is being uttered by some guy with a delusional disorder, I would love to hear your response. Or if you think that it actually has some meaning, I would also love to hear what you have to say. First challenge question of the day. But as we continue onward, and we want to look at some of the things that Charles Manson could be doing, I think that he is very much involved with just childhood imagination. I wish that I could go back to the days of, just living in your own imagination land, for lack of a better term, where you could just spend hours upon hours reliving the same scenarios with your imaginary friends and such and imaginary characters. I wish I could go back to there. And part of me just thinks that Charles Manson never grew out of that phase, because when you look at a lot of the ways that he dealt with prison, I think it's definitely a response to dealing with prison, being in a cell for, I guess, 18 to 22 hours a day. Perhaps that's one of the ways that he would respond to it, by really entering a world of imagination and talking about the capabilities of the mind, that it's not completely baseless. Because when you listen to Charles Manson in interviews, sometimes people would challenge him about the Manson family murders, and then he would immediately start saying, I don't live in that world. That's not my world. It's like his defense mechanism is to just really dwell on the imagination. And one of his most famous quotes is that the mind, there's a universe in there. I don't think it's 100% baseless. Do I think Charles Manson believed everything that he said? No, absolutely not. I think he told lots of lies to get women to do things for him. Not only sex. No, not only sex. Power is almost more valuable in sex, and that kind of trinity of true crime, sexual deviance, aggression, sexuality, and domination. I mean, power is very, very important. And yeah, absolutely, he wanted power, he wanted influence, he wanted a following, and then he would get people to do pretty much anything he wanted. And part of it is that, yes, he genuinely did want to be a musician and he cared about music. The other side is he just wanted to manipulate people for the pleasures of momentary domination, as well as pushing things to limits, making himself feel more supreme. And Stephanie Harlowe talks about this a little bit, about how he needs to fuel his ego by adding in members to his cult-like following. So some of the things that we also got in this upload were the introduction of an individual named Bruce Davis. Bruce Davis is often described as Charles Manson's first right-hand man, but later on he would adopt a second right-hand man who was on par with Bruce Davis. I was quite surprised that Stephanie Harlowe didn't mention that Bruce Davis is one of the suspects in the Zodiac Killer mystery. Now, I don't really think there's a lot of credibility in Bruce Davis being a Zodiac Killer suspect, and we've done an upload about that on the channel, giving some more detailed reasons why. But I thought it was quite odd that she didn't mention that at all. Maybe it's something that most people don't think about too much. But, I mean, I found out about Bruce Davis because of a poll someone had listed talking about how they believed, they polled viewers, and many people thought that Bruce Davis could genuinely be the Zodiac Killer. I got to stand by one of my original points with that. Once you start linking major level crimes together, like the Manson family try to link that to the Zodiac Killer, there's a lower likelihood of that being true. The same way you try and link the Black Dahlia Avenger to the Zodiac Killer, there's a lower likelihood of that being true. So Charles Manson is someone who had an enormous amount of persuasive ability, but in reality, it seems like it's following the same cult leader mentality. And Stephanie Harlowe openly says he would go after people that were bent but not broken. And I think there's a very big reason for that. As we just said, he's telling people, oh, you are not loved by your parents, therefore you will need to come to me for love. He even described himself as the gardener of Ashbury Haight in San Francisco, the gardener, because he would help all the other people grow, help all the other children grow, all the other souls to grow. So some people were just really pulled in and captivated by that message. And in reality, he was preying on people who were in vulnerable situations. And that thing that I was talking about, the 3 signs of a cult leader, there was one point in that discussion where the guy says, oh yes, love. They will use love. They will always try to manipulate people with love. You love this and you love that. And if all you care about is love, then you're never wrong. You love doing this and you love doing that. And you must be doing the right thing because you just love everything. And at first I didn't quite understand what he meant. And then I kind of got what he was saying. It's like, a cult does not have to have anything other than submission and a following toward an individual. Toward Charles Manson, or toward Jim Jones, or perhaps toward Stefan Molyneux, if you're going to go down that road. But the thing is, though, I mean, it requires submission and following behind this individual, and they're just only focused on this person. They're following this person because they think they're going to be getting love in return. And if they think that they're just going to be getting love from Charles Manson, and love from Charles Manson is the end goal, that that's the greatest thing in the world, that there's nothing greater than love from Charles Manson, then they'll do anything that he wants, because that's the source of the love that is going to be provided to them. That's the source of goodness that will be provided to them, and then that will lead them to create atrocities. And that's what really happened with the Manson family murders, but we'll talk about those in the future uploads once we follow along with this series. This one would more talk about how these people would follow Charles Manson around. They would want to just do things like restoring and cleaning up cars, and then Charles Manson would just give them away for free, and people are like, what are you doing? We worked on these things. And he's like, it's about getting rid of material possessions, but like just very bizarre things. Or as well as if some women in the Manson family would become pregnant, then he would separate the women from their children right after they were born. And then they began to realize, wait a second, maybe there's something more to life than just loving Charles Manson. What about the love that I'm feeling for this child? I mean, you're talking about parents and children being separated. There's really something else going on. So they begin to question his motivation and his message. This part here was also some things that Stephanie Harlowe brought up that I thought were rather intriguing. I don't know if it's the most shocking thing in the world, but Charles Manson really liked to play guitar. Stephanie insists that he wasn't a good guitarist. He was just average at best. But the first time that he played in a studio, he had a total meltdown because they were telling him, you have to stand like this. Now you have to get closer to the microphone. There are all these things around him, and like you have to change your voice in certain ways, and he just couldn't deal with the pressure and the directions and being told what to do, and he had a meltdown. And like, I don't find that very surprising, and he was probably just somebody who was out of his element and didn't really know what to do. But you really see here, though, that I think it shouldn't be downplayed that Charles Manson has some type of delusional disorder. It might have just dealt with like a way that his mental state was altered after being in prison, not to mention partnered with all of those traumatic things that we mentioned from his childhood in part 1, like the things about humiliation and rejection, getting embarrassed by teachers, getting humiliated by his uncle, as well as just spending time in prison. And also, learning how to manipulate people must be a very big one. And one of the things that Stephanie Harlowe even talks about is some guy pulls a gun out and Charles Manson's looking at the gun right in his face, and he has the ability to talk him down. But at the same time, I mean, one of the reasons why Charles Manson is so good at persuading people and manipulating people is there is a lot going on behind the scenes. And that's my takeaway from the second part here. There's a lot going on behind the scenes in the way Charles Manson is doing things, because some points that were also mentioned by Stephanie Harlowe is that he was the kind of person who would trip on LSD with the followers of the Manson family. But at the same time, he would also give himself a smaller dosage. And he would be very well aware of this. It's blatantly obvious to him what's going on. He is having a smaller dosage of LSD so that he can tell them that he's more balanced, he's more aware of things, he seems more in control, he seems like he is not as trippy as they are during these, like, LSD binge sessions. So in short, he is doing things behind the scenes that is making his outward appearance seem different. And that's what I think Charles Manson did up until the day that he died. And when you listen to all of these things about him in prison, like, one of the other famous quotes from him, when he talks about, like, what is he? What are you all about? I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo. I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine. And a straight razor if you get too close to me. Just had to finish that one up there. And the thing is, though, when he says stuff like that, it's not exactly that it doesn't have meaning. It's that he's just talking with a very particular intonation. He's trying to pull people into his exaggerated expressions and his exaggerated voice. And they're just beginning to question, well, what exactly does he mean by that? And I even said something about what he means about, getting out of the room and all that. But I was even flipping through the comments section, like, years ago when I first saw that video online about being a boxcar and a jug of wine. And some guy in the comments section is, oh my gosh, I know he's Charles Manson, but I'm a boxcar and a jug of wine. I love that. That sounds so poetic. I think he was doing that gimmick until the day he died. All the way through prison, he is just, like, talking in a very peculiar way to pull people into him, saying things in what Stephanie described as talking in circles about something. What are you? Nobody. I'm a tramp, a bum, a hobo. He is just talking in circles, and someone else can project their own meaning onto that. Then they can be like, oh, maybe he means this, or this must mean that, and they kind of use their own pattern-seeking abilities to put things in order. I don't think that everything he said was nonsense and couldn't be followed in a logical sequence, unless it's that whoosh kebab broth vantage stuff. But it's like, I think, though, that that's just the heart and soul of Charles Manson. And the big points that we mentioned, though, from Stephanie Harlowe, thankfully, that she said the big influences were L. Ron Hubbard in Scientology, plus Dale Carnegie in Persuasion Tactics, Stranger in a Strange Land, and the Beatles and other rock star movements of the 1950s and 60s and so on that really created this image. And if you put all of those things together, you get Charles Manson. But even still, though, I mean, that necessarily wouldn't really need to lead to things to murder. To lead to all the murders of the Manson family, I think you would actually have to bring in all of the destruction from his childhood, the rejection from his family, unstable situations with his mother, being betrayed by many pillars of the community, whether it's his uncle or his teachers, and then those negative impacts greatly affected his mental state. But one of the things that he was able to do was to put it both inward and outward. Like we said, some people import destruction, some people export destruction. I think Charles Manson did a little bit of both, and in some ways he is a rather complicated individual. But what a lot of people don't know is, where does the madness end and where does the calculation begin? And I think we're going to answer that question in part 3. So stay tuned and look out for part 3 on this channel. If you like this upload, you can hit the like button. And if you would like to subscribe, you haven't done that already, please hit that subscribe button. And if you have anything to say at all, please drop a comment below. I would love to hear from you and talk a little bit more about Charles Manson, the Manson family, Stephanie Harlowe, and cult leadership, anything that we've said. Until next time.